For our fifth question for our evaluation, it was how did we attract or address our audience? And because our audience was the younger generation, like teenagers, as well as middle class, elder generation, we tried to attract them by having an interesting and gripping storyline about historical events which would appeal to everybody, as everybody knows about the Second World War, so they would be able to relate to it in some way by knowing about the war or being affected by the war. But we also diversified the storyline by making it centred around the escape of something that they just didn't want to have to face, but in the end having to face it anyway. And I think that attracted our audience by making it an interesting storyline, as well as something that everybody could relate to in some way or another, by the teenagers trying to relate to having to get away from something, trying to run from something and find somewhere that they feel safe, and by adults being able to relate to the war and how it affected them and how they must have felt. Also by the social class of Jewish teenagers, people like that would be able to relate to it by knowing that that affected them in some way, and that's how they felt during that time, and there were actually genuine people in the war that were affected by it, and everybody had some way of being affected by it, and somehow teenagers were affected by it a lot more than what people thought. So I think that attracted audience. Also, we attracted the audience and addressed them by having young actors throughout it, because our four main protagonists were all 17 years old, so our actors were all 17 years old, and I think that attracted them by being able to make the audience relate to them and see that it can be a modern thing and it can be something that you can watch if you're younger, even if it is about old events that could be very, very serious. Also, the older theme to it, as it was about the Second World War and because of the sepia that showed the age of it, I think that attracted the audience by having the historical feel to it. Also, the iconography we used, we allowed that the soldiers were wearing army clothes, and there was a lot of different places and locations that we used to film that could interest or attract people, as we used a windmill for some of the filming and part of the scenes, and I think that could interest people because nobody would really classify a windmill as being something you'd relate to the war. So I think that addressed people by making it seem interesting, and it was new and they hadn't really seen a film like that before, and they wanted to know how that could be incorporated into the film. Also, I think that the way that we used the mise-en-scène in the film, like the outfits, really represented the characters well and meant that people could relate to them and they'd be able to take things away from it and relate to them and see that they could have been affected by it, or if they were affected by it. Also, other mise-en-scène like the location and the editing that we used, as we edited the older scenes with sepia, I think that could attract people by showing that it was really interesting and an older time. And from the feedback that we got for our film by our peers, we found that the editing for the windmill scenes and the war scenes were really good, and it really worked in showing that it was an aged film and it was based in older times. So I think the editing worked well in attracting the audience and keeping them interested. Other mise-en-scène aspects could include the camera that we used, as we tried to use a lot of angles that could get the audience to really focus in on some things, like for the scene where we focused on the footstep in the mud and the grass. I think the way that we used the camera in focusing on certain things and having wide shots as well, by showing the whole establishing shot and having the whole scene in the picture, I think that